if we really want to build things differently, we need to build them for the people that are excluded by the system now, and we're not going to be able to do that unless we work with those people. So we've had, I think at this point, over 300 individuals and organizations that have worked with the program on various projects.
Today on Law Next, I'm live at the Legal Services Corporation's Innovations in Technology Conference in Portland, Oregon, where my guest will be Stacy Butler, Director of the Innovation for Justice program at the University of Arizona James E. Rogers College of Law. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to Law Next, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. We'll get to today's interview in just a moment. But first, let's hear from the sponsors who generously support Law Next. And now, on to this week's interview. Stacy Butler, welcome to Law Next.
Thank you for having me.
And as I said, we are sitting here live in a big, just outside some of the meeting rooms, so there's going to be a lot of background noise here, but it's great to be able to sit down and talk to you face-to-face as opposed to over some VoIP connection or something. So, Stacy, you are the Director of the Innovation for Justice program at the Arizona Law School. You are the President of the Board of Step Up for Justice, is that right?
That's correct.
You've also been involved in regulatory reform efforts in Arizona as well, right?
Yes, I served on the Arizona Supreme Court.
So we've got a lot to talk about. I'd like to touch on all of that. You've been a busy person, and I'd like to try and talk about all of those. But can I just start with what was your background? What were you doing before you were doing what you're doing now?
Well, immediately before we launched the Innovation for Justice program, I was really working 3 jobs, which was too many. So I worked full-time in federal court for a long time, working at the District Court of Arizona as a permanent law clerk, and doing a lot of work in that space on improving federal court services for self-represented litigants. I also was really involved in the launch of Step Up to Justice, which we opened our doors in January of 2017, so I was serving as the board president of a startup, privately funded nonprofit pro bono law center, which was incredibly time-consuming, and then teaching in an adjunct capacity at the law school, actually first teaching legal writing, and then I wrote a course called Access to Justice and taught that, and so it got to the point where that was too many things and decided to step away from the federal court work and focus more fully on my work in access to justice.
Yeah. And you were doing a lot of pro bono yourself as well, right?
Well, because I worked at federal court for a long time, I was in active status on the bar, and various ethical rules prohibit law clerks from providing legal services. So my involvement
I saw you won multiple awards as pro bono attorney of the year.
I have been named pro bono attorney of the year a few times. That really was because I was doing a lot of kind of advocacy work in that space, serving on first the advisory board of our volunteer lawyers program, and then serving as the president of Step Up to Justice. So, because I couldn't provide direct services to clients, I was really involved for a long time about how we improve the delivery of pro bono services, how we get more attorneys involved in pro bono, and the capacity of pro bono to, I think, really drive change in the access to justice space.
And what drove your interest in that? How did you become interested in enhancing access to justice and delivering pro bono?
I've had a long time interest in volunteerism and the connections between systems and volunteering, and dating back to college, and particularly in law school, did a lot of work on getting law students involved in volunteering their services. So it's just something I've been passionate about for a long time. Yeah.
You started with the Innovation for Justice program, I think, as an adjunct, and then became full-time, or how did you get involved with the program?
So I taught this Access to Justice course as an adjunct, and then was ready to do more full-time Access to Justice work, and so U of A approached me about, really we were viewing that Access to Justice course, I think, as a prototype for a larger program, and so they approached me about would I come on board full-time and grow that into a full-time program. And so Innovation for Justice is really born from, my work in the community for 20 years, and also lessons learned in teaching that Access to Justice course. And it was, I think, right place, right time. There was suddenly some movement in legal education to create these innovation lab spaces. And so that was kind of the origin story for I4J.
Yeah. What is it you're trying to teach students through the Innovation for Justice program? What are the objectives of the program?
So I think the goal is that what we've been doing in legal education can't continue if we're going to ever really move the needle on the justice gap, and that students need to start thinking radically differently about the delivery of legal services and social justice problem solving. So our learning objectives are things like being able to work collaboratively across disciplines and not just apply a legal lens to everything, to think creatively about solution building, not jumping to the first solution that occurs to you, but taking the time to explore and consider ideas that maybe seem wild, but when you sit on them a while, actually have some traction in the community. To be able to work with and within community is a really important part of the program, giving voice to those marginalized populations that, if we really want to build things differently, we need to build them for the people that are excluded by the system now, and we're not going to be able to do that unless we work with those people. So we've had, I think at this point, over 300 individuals and organizations that have worked with the program on various projects. I want my students to understand systems level challenges and think both upstream and downstream of the interventions they're contemplating, and kind of the so what of what they build. If I do this, what will happen, and is that what I want to have happen, and how will I measure it and know if it's happening? Being able to apply technology effectively. We do a lot of collaborative technology in the classroom to help students information share and work together, and to add transparency around who's doing what, and how everyone can contribute their unique skill set. We do talk about evidence-based evaluation, and I think that's something we don't talk enough about in the Access to Justice world. So I want my students to understand you don't just launch something into the world and then declare justice served and wipe your hands of it. And then finally being able to iterate, pivot, accepting failure and with grace, and moving on to some other part of the idea that still has some traction, or letting go of an idea if it doesn't, and not persistently going after a solution because you like it when the rest of the world is telling you it's not the solution they wanted.
Yeah, when I hear you describe those goals, it's really, they're important goals in the access to justice world, but they're important lessons and goals in any aspect of professional life and career.
I hope so. I tell my students all the time that we're not going to solve this, huge problem that we're working on in a semester, but that they're going to leave with skills and new mindsets that I hope will serve them, because they're the future leaders. They're wherever they go after they leave U of A Law, they're going to be embedded in spaces where they could apply these skills and do something big and disruptive and drive change. If they can, take these things forward and apply them. So I try to give them a lot of tools to take with them, and everything is open source to them, and I tell them they can come back anytime, and they will always be on the Google Drive for them. And so I really try to keep them engaged with the program after they finish a course. Yeah.
You mentioned that, what did you say, a dozen or so innovation programs at law schools in the country. Any idea why other schools aren't doing this? Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm thinking, boy, I want to go back to law school. This sounds great.
But it's at the same time, it's grown. Dan Jackson has this amazing slide that shows the trajectory of the rise of the law school lab, and I think they'll continue to grow. I think University of Richmond is looking at adding one now, and so I think there has to be a culture within legal education to encourage the work, and then there have to be people who can drive it. You have to have a lot of skill sets besides just your JD to be able to run a lab like this, and it's a lot of work, and it's a heavy lift to get it off the ground. So I think that's part of it too, is just finding the people willing to come into legal education and run these programs.
Yeah. We talked before we started recording we were talking about the Law X program at BYU, which I've done a podcast with them and been to them a couple of times. How is your program similar or different from what they're doing at Law X?
So I think Law X is only law students. And so
it is only law
that's
students.
That's one difference.
As far as I know.
Law X is, I think, mostly focused on, take one problem in the legal profession and largely through guided interview and document automation build a bigger, better solution to that problem. My program at I4J is we do still use this lens of design and systems thinking, and we pick a social justice issue that we're going to work on for a year, but the deliverables are really wide-ranging. There is still a goal of producing some useful community deliverables by the end of a challenge, but We've done tech tools, but we've also have done reports and videos and handouts for community and materials for the courts. So we're, I think, producing a lot of different things, and I think our model of taking a deep dive into one issue over the course of a year is another thing that different, sets us apart from some of the other spaces.
Is there any cross-pollination with other parts of the university? I mean, the design school or something like that at the university?
We don't have a design school.
You don't have, I didn't, yeah.
But, I work really hard our university, I think like every university, is really siloed, and so I work really hard to network across the university, and there is certainly a community of faculty and staff at U of A that are interested in design thinking and systems thinking, and so we do try to work together, facilitate each other's courses, and recruit from each other's programs so that we can all be, creating these interdisciplinary spaces. But that really happens through just relationship and networking on campus, and working to get people on campus to know what I4J is doing.
So what is it that you're trying to teach the students through your courses?
Well, there's several learning objectives that are really central to the work of I4J. One is this idea of working across disciplines, being able to work collaboratively, not treating technology as a magic bullet, and knowing when technology can be useful and when it's not the right solution. Being able to apply both design thinking lens but also a systems thinking lens, so looking beyond just how one person might experience an issue or how we could improve a system for one user, but who are the other stakeholders that need to be considered, so that when we are looking at solution spaces, we're leveraging wider capacity to deliver impact.
I mean, so I understand there's more than just law students in it, but with a specific reference to law students, since that's what I'm interested in, why does it matter for them to learn about things like design thinking and systems thinking? How does that help them in their careers, in their legal careers, as legal professionals?
Well, what I hear from my students is that I often get law students in their third year. This is when they have the time and space to engage with a program like I4J, and I often hear from them that this idea of being human-centered and how you approach problem solving helps them kind of reconnect with why they want to be a lawyer, and I think it's really important, I think, for lawyers who are the guardians of justice to be able to have that skill of, before I jump in and try to solve this problem, I need to reflect on who am I trying to serve here, and what is their need, and how do I build for that person or someone in that experience. Whether you're going to be a lawyer or something else after graduation, I just think it makes you a better professional. Yeah.
Can you describe a couple of the courses that you offer, what they are?
Sure. So the fall graduate level course is the course that launches whatever challenge we're working on in that year, and that course is called Innovation for Justice. And that course, we start with working in the community with an empathy lens, trying to understand a problem from a lot of community perspectives. Students unpack what they've learned and brainstorm on a lot of different solutions. They go out in the community and test some of their ideas. By the end of that semester, they will produce some sort of tool or deliverable. The project we did with BYU was in that course. That was the course that produced Hello Landlord. In the spring, I have my undergraduate class, which is called Visualizing Justice. I co-teach that with an art professor. We take that same topic, but we focus much more on how art and design can be a legal empowerment tool. I also have a policy level course called Innovating Legal Services. That course is combined undergraduate and graduate students working on specifically one pathway of legal service delivery. So last year we worked on the issue of tiered legal services. This year we're conducting usability testing of Utah's ODR platform. So that course is, I think, more focused on legal profession issues where we're falling short in legal service delivery.
Right. And you mentioned, again, not to dwell on the LawX, but just because you just mentioned it, you in the LawX program collaborated on this project that led to this development of a product, essentially, called Hello Landlord, right? So what can you just describe what that collaboration was? What did you do, and what was the problem you set out to solve, and how did you go about it?
Sure. So the challenge for that semester was framed as improving housing stability for low-income communities by reducing eviction. So very broadly framed challenge. And I think we went into that challenge thinking we were going to be working on a very court-based solution. We started by sending students to observe in court. We ran very similar experiences both in Tucson and in Provo, so that we could really be sharing knowledge about the issue across jurisdictions with an eye toward building something that could scale and that could work in more than one place. Early in the semester, students were not interested in doing anything about the court proceeding part of eviction because they all felt that it was just too rapid and rigid. By the time someone's holding that eviction notice in their hand, like, you have missed your intervention window. And so Hello Landlord was born from student observations that both from landlords and from tenants that there's these miscommunications happening where tenants don't understand that something is going to lead to an eviction if it's not remedied, and where landlords feel that they aren't able to engage with tenants, and that if we could encourage those parties to dialogue sooner, that we might be able to reduce eviction in that way. And so Hello Landlord is an online tool that just helps tenants draft letters to their landlords, whether they're going to miss a rental payment or something's wrong with their rental, which are really kind of the two big drivers of eviction in our two communities.
Yeah. And as I recall, I think you might have said this to me at some point, that one of the surprising outcomes of that was that landlords were eager to engage. The perception is just the opposite. They don't want to be. And usually landlords are represented by attorneys, and tenants aren't represented by attorneys in any eviction process or something. So I don't know if that's a natural sort of wall between them, just that distinction. But you found otherwise, right?
So I think that speaks to your earlier question about why do law students need design and systems thinking. I mean, because they took the time to talk to lots of stakeholders around the issue and not just begin with, okay, well, we'll do something for tenants. They did get to this more robust solution that I continue to have a lot of conversations with people even now, and that project is over a year old now, but I still am talking to a lot of landlords who are just really tired of being the villains in that story and are really looking for ways to have a voice in the eviction prevention discussion. And at the time will tell. The tool's very new and we still need to evaluate it. But my hope is that we'll be able to demonstrate that doing that kind of upstream work and including parties that aren't always included can be a really fruitful way to prevent a socioeconomic problem from becoming a legal problem.
Right. And if I understand the work that you did on that project led to further work on something you're calling the Rent Project, and a collaboration with Step Up for Justice, which is your other hat, one of your other hats.
Yes, I often wear more than one hat.
Yeah, well, welcome to my world.
Right, most of us do, I think. Yeah. There were really two ideas that came out of that fall collaboration with BYU, and one was the communication tool, Hello Landlord. But my students in particular heard from a lot of people in our community that we needed tenant education because we knew we weren't going to be able to get to any structural changes around eviction, any changes to the laws in Arizona, which are not particularly tenant friendly. And so for tenants who feel confused and powerless and don't know what to do, they're not going to self-educate in the moment of crisis around an eviction, and that we need to get further. We need to reach them sooner and give them some education. We had toyed with some ideas of how to fold that into a Hello Landlord-like platform, and they didn't test well in the community. One idea was to have landlords incentivize tenants to do tenant education at the start of a lease. Landlords did not want to do that, so that's a good example, I think, of why you need to test ideas before you invest resources. But we did have a lot of social services that said we would work with you on tenant education. And so the Rent Project is a curriculum that was built really within the community. It fills knowledge gaps that we identified with tenants and the social services that work with them. It runs embedded in social service offices, particularly in the evenings when we can reach tenants after work. And the goal is to give them just a 1 hour understanding of the most important things you need to know as a tenant, both your rights but also your responsibilities. And we are running it as a research study, so we'll be able to hopefully collect some metrics around whether that sort of earlier education can have an eviction reduction effect.
And you are the president of the board of directors of Step Up to Justice, is that?
Yes.
So what is Step Up to Justice for Justice?
So Step Up to Justice is a privately funded, nonprofit pro bono law center It funds just the infrastructure to make the connection between volunteer attorneys and the clients who need their services. So it provides client screening and eligibility. It has a technology platform that really helps staff and clients and attorneys all information share to keep things running efficiently. They do the attorney recruitment, and then the connection between the attorney and the client is made across a menu of options. So they have clients that come to clinics both in the Step Up to Justice offices, but also clinics that run in the courthouses in Tucson. They can, if a case is complex enough that it needs a direct representation relationship, they can make that match. So kind of lots of different opportunities for clients to get legal services.
Yeah. And are you serving low-income clients, or is it?
Yeah, by design, it matches the same eligibility requirements as our LSC provider in our community, so that we can cross-refer. And actually, the bulk of our clients are referred to Step Up to Justice from our LSC-funded legal service provider.
Yeah. What was the kind of the need that brought that about? I mean, is it that the existing legal services programs aren't able to serve the population, and that there was a need for supplemental programs, or what was the sort of genesis of how that program?
There was really a twofold need. I mean, like every other federally funded legal service provider, yes, ours was not able to serve the clients, all of the clients that needed and qualified for their services. But we also had no place for them to send conflicts, which is particularly an issue in domestic violence cases. We were seeing a phenomenon where there was sort of an understanding in the abuser community that if you were first in the door at the legal aid office, you could conflict out your partner or spouse from receiving DV-related legal services, and that's a really troubling conflict of interest to see happening in the community. So, it was partly that, but we also had a huge number of attorneys that wanted to volunteer, and the VLP program within our legal service LSC-funded legal aid office wasn't able to reach all of those volunteer attorneys and use that additional resource. So it was also to capture, I think now I'm at 3 reasons why we launched, but it was also to capture this group of volunteer attorneys that really, there was an untapped resource there.
Yeah. Is there not, I'm trying to think of, I can't think of any sort of parallel models in Massachusetts, although we have something like, bar affiliated, like the Volunteer Lawyers Program of the Boston Bar, which, connects volunteer attorneys to needs such as that. But I can't think of sort of private organizations. It seems like a unique model to have a private organization coordinating volunteer attorneys and matching them to low-income clients who need legal services.
It is a unique model. There are a handful of other nonprofits doing that work, one in San Diego, one in, I think, Austin, Texas. But yeah, it's very unique, and it's unique because it's hard. I mean, you have to privately fund I think our operating budget now is in the $300,000 range. That's a lot of money to raise every year, particularly when you're not getting any LSC funding or IOLTA funding. We don't get any funding from either of those sources, no government funding at all. So,
where do you get the funding?
It's from a lot of places. We're really patching it together from foundations and organization sponsorship and private donors and grant writing. So
how many volunteer attorneys are involved in it?
About 200 now.
Wow, that's great. Mm-hmm. And like roughly how many clients do you serve, or matters or cases?
I think we were at over 3,000 clients served, $3.5 million in free civil legal services donated into the community since 2017.
We'll get back to my interview in just a moment, but first, let's take a break to hear from the sponsors who generously support Law Next. And now, let's continue this week's interview. Are there other ways in which your day job at Innovation for Justice and Step Up for Justice are collaborating or working together?
And the REM project is our only explicit partnership right now. A lot of my students end up being volunteers at Step Up to Justice. Actually, 2 of my former students are now employed at Step Up to Justice. So in that way, there's some overlap. They are different models. Step Up to Justice is a pro bono law center, and Innovation for Justice is a social justice innovation lab. So I think they're doing different things, but in the same space. And I learn a lot from being involved in both.
So another project that I think maybe you're working on now, or you're working on recently, is the Human Trafficking Survivor Advocate Toolkit, which was done with San Diego, with the University UC San Diego? Is it UC San? No, not University. San Diego.
University of San Diego.
University
Yes,
of San
so
Diego.
that's actually that's a 4-school. Our human trafficking challenge this year is a 4-school collaboration with University of San Diego, Duke, and Harvard, as well as U of A. And so the fall Innovation for Justice course just wrapped, and that course had produced 2 tools that are still in prototype. One is the Advocate Toolkit that you mentioned. The other is a Sports Support Survivors campaign that brings human trafficking fundraising opportunities for human trafficking survivor organizations and awareness around the needs of survivors to collegiate sports. And that was really by design to raise awareness around the needs of survivors in the college sports world, because there's an unfortunate connection between professional sports and human trafficking. Human trafficking tends to increase when a professional sporting event such as the Super Bowl is happening in a community. So the hope is to bring that education to college sports and shift some of the culture that could otherwise lead to that connection later in the pro sports space.
So that's about equipping advocates with information they need, or is that about tackling the problem more directly? Or?
Well, the Advocate Toolkit is about equipping advocates with information they need, but across disciplines. And so one of the things the students found was that lawyers who are serving survivors really only know how to do the legal piece, and then people working in housing might be able to provide, because as a survivor, when you exit, you need every service. You are literally without resources, and so there these siloed resources that survivors are trying to navigate again and again and again can be very re-traumatizing. And so what we heard from service providers were that they know that they're not filling all of those gaps, but they need a quick and ready grab-and-go resource to help them understand, like, what other things should they be thinking about and how should they navigate those. And what was available when we looked online were these very dense, very hard to find resources that weren't accessible for advocates working in the community. And so the Advocate Toolkit is really trying to make these grab-and-go 1 to 2 page info sheets that kind of check all of the boxes of what you need to think about if you're interfacing with a survivor who's exited.
Yeah. So something else I want to ask you about is the Arizona Task Force on the Delivery of Legal Services, which you are a member of the task force, as I understand it.
Correct.
But in addition, it's another kind of worlds collide situation, because your Innovation for Justice program developed a proposal, I guess, essentially, you for a new tier of legal professionals, essentially, right?
Correct.
So tell me about that. Let's start with what you did through the Innovation for Justice program, and then we can talk more about the task force more broadly. But.
Okay, so this is a big goal for the I4J program, is to be agile enough to be able to jump onto opportunities as they arise, because things are happening so quickly in some ways in the world of legal innovation, and yet so slowly in other ways.
Yeah.
But when I was appointed to the task force, I was really interested in particular the issue of tiered legal services. The other big issue on that task force is the 5.4 changes, and I was able to use one of our Innovating Legal Services course as a space to house some exploration around this issue of tiered legal services, specifically for the nonprofit community and for marginalized populations. Because I think what we've seen so far in tiered legal services in Washington and Utah is that those are market-driven models. Like, we're creating the Triple LT and the LLP are both, I think, what's going to happen and what is happening is those are paralegals who become this new tier able to give legal advice, but are charging for those services and are providing those services really in traditional frameworks like law firms. I'm really interested in what is the capacity of I hate to use the term non-lawyers. I don't have a better word yet, except maybe people with legal training but not a JD, which is much harder to say. So, but if we can create these new types of professionals who aren't just giving legal information, but can give legal advice, the access to justice world would really benefit from that if we can do it well. And so another issue with some of the regulatory reform is that I think it's very hard for those decision makers to get diverse voices in the room. It's a group of professionals. They're largely lawyers and judges. They're doing a lot of other things besides that task force. But universities can really be positioned to be that space, the community engaged space around some of the issues that these task forces are grappling with. So, first of all, having both undergraduates and graduate students in that project helped amplify the discussion around the future of the profession. How do law students feel about this idea of other professionals being able to provide services, but also undergrads undergrads. We have a BA in law program at U of A, so they're potentially positioned to be future service providers without a JD, and so I think that voice needs to be in the room.
Yeah.
But mostly the voice of DV survivors and the people who serve them was really important to that project, to understand where are we not meeting your needs through the traditional models of service. And we have lay legal advocates now working in the DV space. They are largely women. They know so much about the legal system and how to navigate the civil legal system, but they can't give legal advice. They can only give legal information. They hit ceilings on that all the time. So how can we empower them? Let them give advice and in a thoughtful way, so that they can provide more robust services. They're trauma informed. They have very strong relationships with those clients. It prevents those clients from having to go outside of that space to get legal advice elsewhere and then bring it back to the lay legal advocate they have a relationship with. So, there's kind of all of those things working together to try to build a model that, again, was informed by a lot of stakeholders, and we hope has the capacity to really leverage what's good and happening now, juice it a little bit, and build something new and successful.
Yeah. So what came out of your program? What was the proposal that you developed specifically?
So the proposal is, over the course of the semester, the students worked with all of these different potential stakeholders and presented to the Supreme Court in May a report and a video proposing that the lay legal advocates at a domestic violence service provider called Emerge in Tucson, that those lay legal advocates have additional training at U of A and then a provisional license from the Arizona Supreme Court, and actually be able to be licensed legal advocates for a 1-year pilot while we test it in the field and collect some metrics around whether they can do that safely, and whether consumers are protected, and whether it actually does meet those legal needs of those clients.
And so bring me up to speed on where we are on this. I know last time I wrote about this was in October. The task force put out its recommendations, which included another kind of limited license practitioner as well, right? Or are they the same?
No, so the proposal from I4J is the only kind of new tier of limited licensed legal professional. There is another recommendation from the task force related to certified document preparers, which we already had in Arizona, but basically relaxing some of the requirements for certified document preparers. I got confused
about that. It almost seemed to me they were proposing two different kinds, one specific to domestic violence and one with a broader palette of
well, and Arizona will continue to work on the issue of licensed legal services, non-lawyer licensed legal services, beyond just the pilot that we proposed, but where the task force landed on that was that there needed to be more time to bring in more substantive legal experts around particular subject matter areas. So it's not off the table for Arizona, but right now our pilot is the only project ready to go in Arizona in that space.
So what else, since you were on the task force, can you speak a little bit more broadly about some of the other recommendations that came out of that task force and where that all stands right now?
Sure. So to answer your question about an update, so the report was produced, the Arizona Supreme Court approved it, it went to the Arizona Judicial Council, they've approved it as well, and so now we're preparing for public comment. There are some proposed rules that need to be generated to present to the public for comment, and there are some administrative orders that need to be produced. So it's the court and the task force members are working on those. The other big piece of this, as I mentioned, was the elimination of 5.4. I can, speak generally about that, but there are two work groups within the task force, and I chair the work group related to tiered legal services. Judge Cruz chairs the work group related to the 5.4, elimination of 5.4. Elimination is probably a strong word. A lot of the parts of 5.4 have been moved into other, or the proposal is to move them into other parts of the ethical rules. But the big change there is to allow non-lawyers to have an ownership interest in legal services.
Yeah. And why do you think that's important for that to happen? I assume you agree with that recommendation?
Yeah, that feels a little outside my space. I'm still waiting to see how that can be valuable to the access to justice community. I really work mostly in the nonprofit space, and so there's maybe some interesting potential there, but it's not something that I've spent a lot of time chewing on.
Yeah.
I do think it's important to the profession to innovate or die, basically. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it opens a lot of doors for people to provide legal services differently in a way that could reach more people. Whether the reach will go far enough into low-income communities, I think remains to be seen.
Do you have a sense of kind of the lay of the land in Arizona in terms of the reception of the organized bar to these proposals? What's been the response since these recommendations came out?
Maybe a little too soon to tell. I think there's been sort of a watch and wait approach. We certainly, the task forces, those meetings were open to the public. There was a public comment period at the end of each meeting. We did hear some concern, both from attorneys, but also we were looking at making some changes to the certified document preparer program, and so heard from some certified document preparers on that. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see when the public comment period opens later this year. It's hard to predict.
Yeah. So, when did you go full time with the Innovation for Justice program?
So I joined the faculty in April of 2018, and the program launched that August.
Okay. In that time, has there been anything that sort of lessons that you've learned that surprised you about trying to teach students about innovation broadly, or about innovation for justice specifically?
That's a good question. I think my students have really loved the work. They really love getting out of the classroom and engaging in community. I secretly believe, it's maybe not a secret now that I'm saying it on a podcast, but I really think that students largely come to law school because they want to make the world a better place, and they think that getting a law degree is going to be a way to do that. And so, then there's all these experiences you have in your law school education that can sort of beat that out of you. And so for the students to have a chance to, sit down in a room full of tenants and just talk about, like, what does this feel like to you? Or to sit down with domestic survivors and say, well, here's how we think the civil legal process works. Like, where are you, hitting barriers, and how do we help us understand why our perception is not your experience? I think they feel really equipped to be listeners in that way, and then they're great at coming up with new ideas and brave and fearless about testing them. I mean, it's just been working with the students is just the best part of the job, because they really want it. They want things to be better, and they want the tools and the skill sets. And I think that's probably what has been the most wonderful surprise about directing the program, is how just fearless the students will be about thinking differently and testing and failing and pivoting and all these things that they don't often have an opportunity to do in law school. I mean, just the idea of failure is like how brave they've been about embracing that idea is amazing to me.
I mean, that's good to hear. I mean, I kind of wondered whether to what extent law students are even sort of thinking about innovation, or even have a sense of what that means. I mean, to what extent do they even have a sense of the ways in which the legal system is broken or flawed, because they haven't really been part of it yet at this point. I know, again, I mentioned earlier that I got the chance to sit in on one of those Law X classes once, and found that to just be a really kind of invigorating opportunity, just because you could just sit there and listen to the students talk about it. I don't think they were putting on a show for the fact that I was there, but they were clearly really passionate about what they were doing and really interested in what they were doing. And I know some of the students who have come out of that program have gone into specifically working in some way or another in either developing tech products related to access to justice or law more generally, or trying to work in some way in pushing forward innovation in law. Have you seen anything like that so far? So
it's, my program's still early stages. I mentioned we do have two students from my program working at Step Up to Justice. A lot of my students haven't graduated yet or just graduated last May. So But yes, I think some of the struggle is that some of them want to work in those spaces and they don't know how to find those jobs.
Yeah.
And so I really work to help them understand that these skill sets, this idea of listening and of not jumping to the first solution you think of, and of testing an idea before you invest resources, and measuring your impact and being able to say, this actually didn't work, we need to pull this back. All of those things you should do no matter what you do in your future career, whether you are an entrepreneur who launches a legal tech company or whether you're just embedded in a law firm. Those are all skills that you should be using and that can make a difference.
Yeah. How does your program fit within the law school more broadly?
There's a number of programs that are U of A law programs. Yeah. I am one of them. Yeah. So it's a unique program in that I'm not a clinic. Yeah. I'm also not teaching doctrinal courses. Yeah. So I'm sort of in this space that no one else is in.
Yeah.
But I'm fortunate. I have a very supportive dean and wonderful staff that have been really just a great help to the program.
Yeah. I guess in a way what I'm kind of asking is does the law school more broadly kind of share a commitment or a belief in the importance of innovation in law, and if so, what do you think should be the role of a law school in that broader innovation and access to justice conversation that's going on?
That's one of the reasons we're running the session we're running this afternoon. I think U of A is proud of what it's done to innovate legal education. Two other examples would be, they were the first school to accept the GRE for admissions. They're the first school to create a BA in law. So it is part of the culture at U of A to be willing to consider new ideas and approaches. I know, there's 10 innovation labs in law schools in the country. That's not very many when there's over 200 law schools nationally. So
that says something right there.
I don't think all of legal education is embracing this idea of innovation.
No, they're certainly not.
And being willing to make changes to the profession.
Yeah. So that says something about your school.
I hope so.
I think so. Anything else that you're involved in that we haven't talked about? We've covered a lot of ground.
We didn't talk much about the online dispute resolution project that we're launching now, but I'm really excited about that project. As far as we can tell, we haven't seen any usability testing done for online dispute resolution in the United States. And
what is that project?
So that project is in partnership with Pew Charitable Trust and the Utah Supreme Court, and so we have a team of students that will have access to a kind of a testing version of the online dispute resolution platform in Utah. Students will take it out into the community and have people from low-income communities sit down with them and go through the tool, and it's a very, it's the UX approach to how a website functions, collect some data around where people are getting stuck or where the tool maybe isn't working as we think it should, and then the students will be making different versions of the tool. We'll be using a program called Adobe XD to create new prototypes of Utah's ODR platform with the goal of improving it, making, if there are problems in how it operates, making recommendations about how it could work better, particularly for defendants in debt collection cases, who are the bulk of these ODR platforms that are rolling out are in small claims. Most of those cases involve debt collection. There's a ton of opportunity there to improve access to justice for these populations that have very high default rates under the current system. But there's also a huge risk that we'll just take a system that's not working for most defendants and layer it onto a new tech platform. And so that this research study is really meant to get at that risk and opportunity intersection and produce some information about how can we really make ODR work for the people that our traditional system does not work for.
Yeah, I've been chasing down Erica Ricard from Pew to be on the podcast, and they keep putting me off until, I guess they're putting out a final plan to have a report out on this ODR program next fall, maybe, or something. Does that sound right?
I don't. More than me.
Well, that's what she told me when she said she can't be on my podcast yet. And the apparently the powers that be or something, they want to wait until this report comes out. So I look forward to reading that. I 20 years ago, I was a mediator in an early ODR program way back when, in the sort of the first incarnation of an eBay online dispute resolution program before they developed their own. There was one developed by a company called Square Trade, which is outside, which there's some company that exists today called Square Trade, but it's not the same company. This was an ODR company. It was where Colin Rule first worked before he went to eBay. But I was thinking yesterday as I was listening to Shannon Salter talk about the BC program that 20 years ago I would have thought ODR would be almost ubiquitous by 20 years later, and here we are still experimenting with it. So,
well, what I think is really interesting is that the regulatory reform conversations and the online dispute conversations are actually in some ways very similar conversations. When we were talking about these disruptive ways that legal services might be delivered or that legal systems might be engaged with, and they both present, I think, very similar opportunities and risks. And so it's deliberate that I'm looking hard at both of those spaces, because in some ways it's the same conversation, just about, one is about people and one is about technology, but but there's a lot of similarity. Yeah,
and they are both disruptive. I mean, the ODR, I think that's one of the, what's been one of the obstacles, I think, to adoption of ODR is that you worked in the courts, so you would know this better than I, but I feel that there are a lot of traditional judges and court officials who have trouble wrapping their heads around delivering justice in different ways, or they have the sort of traditional idea of what it means to deliver justice, and it involves courtrooms and lawyers and procedures that they've grown up with and are used to, and they have difficulty understanding that you can bring people to a place of justice in a different way.
Right. I mean, that's a narrative that I have to push back on a lot, this idea of kind of second-class justice. If you create this new tier, then it's just going to be only for low-income people. If you create online dispute resolution, the wealthy will still go to court and only low-income will go online. And that what I think you have to shift in that argument is we aren't comparing the gold standard to this new, allegedly second-class concept. We're comparing this new concept to the status quo, which is nothing.
Right.
It is this new thing we could do better than nothing, because most people get nothing.
Right. I mean, the so-called gold standard doesn't even work, and doesn't.
Correct.
Nobody ever gets to the gold standard.
Well,
it's totally broken
people
in the
with
first place.
A lot of wealth do, but most of us don't, right? And that's another on the topic of what surprises students when they encounter the I4J program is I think a lot of them come understanding there's a justice gap, but they do not understand how deep and wide it is until they really get into the course and get exposed to the statistics and the experiences.
Yeah, I think most lawyers don't understand how deep and wide it is. I think most people working in the system don't understand it. That's the great thing about a conference like this, is you can come here and be with fellow travelers, I guess.
It's such a shot in the arm. I love conferences like this. It is really, it's great. Because most of us are doing particularly in the legal innovation lab world, there's 10 of us across the country. We're all really working alone a lot of the time. And so it's really nice to come here and be with your people. Yeah.
Well, Stacy Butler, thank you very much for taking the time out of this conference to sit down and talk to me. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, thanks. I really appreciated the opportunity to talk to you.
Enjoyed it. And before we finish up, let me just take a moment to again thank the sponsor who made today's show possible. That's MyCase. With thousands of customers, is a trusted practice management solution, helping lawyers across the country run organized, efficient, and successful law firms. You can try MyCase for free today at mycase.com. Thanks also to our sustaining members on patreon.com. You can find us on patreon.com/lawnext, but our two sustaining members right now are Tim Stanley of Justia and John Grant of Agile Lawyer. A big thanks to them. And a big thanks, as always, to Ben Ambrogi for producing and editing the show. And that's it for this week. This is Bob Ambrogi.